Baba Viveka wants to have it that the snake is somehow in there among its bases of designation on that side, even though he knows, because he's a, says he's a Madhyamaka, he's writing commentary on Nagarjuna, he knows that when you analyze and you go through all his reasons, this thing is not going to be findable there. But, in fact, the snake or the person is imputed to a basis of designation that is utterly lacking, even conventionally, in a shred of person or snake nature. That's not the basis of how it gets imputed. Now, what I haven't said so far is like, okay, well then how do you know, maybe I sort of alluded to it, but I didn't come and say, well, how do you know then what's a suitable basis of designation? You have a basis of designation, you have an external world. How do you decide what it's like? Well, how do we know if some candidate to be imputed as X is suitable to be called X? Well, in fact, we're often wrong, and so simply we will say that what an ordinary, unimpaired observer takes as X is what we call X in the world. It doesn't guarantee that this is absolutely right, but this is like where you have to start. What an ordinary, unimpaired observer takes as X is what we call X in the world. Let's say that's our base model of the universe. All right? It's not certified correct, but it's a legitimate. Why? It's like our karma gives us a certain framework for perceiving the world, and if it hasn't been screwed with in some way, such that then that it has some I'm seeing a mirror and unexpectedly and thought it was a face. If it hasn't been tampered with some kind of flaw like that, then we can say that in the world, what an unimpaired, a healthy, unimpaired, ordinary observer takes as X is what we call X. That's then, from within that, if you take that sort of that's a cat, approach, and you say, well, let's see what further investigation, further analysis from either an ultimate or conventional point of view, further inspection, further observation, if it can't be discredited by conventional or ultimate, either one, there's these two kinds of ways to look. You could say, what is the ultimate nature of the cat? And you say, oh, well, there was this appearance of the cat as existing by way of its own nature, and that, even though everybody just takes it for granted, turns out that's not actually right. Because on further investigation, it turns out that portion of what everybody in the world believes is completely wrong. And then, right? And then the other hand, there could be something that's appearing in one way, and maybe even sometimes it's like a lot of people agreeing, like a lot of people agreeing women are inferior to men at one time, right? And then it's like, well, upon further investigation, this general consensus of taking it that this as that, turns out to be, well, there actually was some impairment in their perception, and we can discredit that based on further experience and analysis without questioning, without the issue of everybody being empty, okay, without bringing in. So even at the conventional level, there can be a refinement of our idea with what constitutes conventional knowledge. So you have this apparent conventional knowledge is like what a healthy, unimpaired observer, takes as X is what we call X in the world. That's what is the big pie. I did this before, but now we have more, it's the big pie. And then you say, well, let's cut off pieces of the pie when you have something that's refuted by conventional analysis or is refuted by ultimate analysis. Okay, so that is actually what I said. Now let me read you a little bit of what I actually said in my own words about this. Let's see. In my commentary in the middle way, I said, the chariot is not established in 7 ways, either in reality or for the world. Yet without analysis, just for the world, it is imputed on independence on its parts. So it's imputed independence on its parts conventionally. There is dependence. There is, just like Venerable Chodron was saying, there's this dependence between the mind and the object imputing, establishing each other. But and so it doesn't require for it to be there intrinsically on its own side. He goes on to say that reasoning that analyzes whether things intrinsically exist isn't going to establish this idea of a chariot. Instead, it's established by a mere, unimpaired, ordinary, conventional, by which this is Tsongkhapa writing, by which I mean worldly consciousness. That's what it is. It's established by a mere, unimpaired, ordinary, conventional, worldly consciousness. It's like, well, that's a chariot. It's nothing, no drugs, no hallucinations, no magician's illusions. It's like, I've got my human karma, and it's like if somebody shows me a chariot, then I can say that's a chariot. And this is why I, Chandrakirti, taught, do not destroy the conventions of the world. And I explicitly said in my text that karma exists and so forth. And I explained all of these things as existing. And when I said what I mean is that they don't have any intrinsic nature, and you can find similar quotes in Nagarjuna and the Buddha. That these statements of things not existing at all, meaning that they don't have any intrinsic nature that's like there on their own side, but they can still be known by unimpaired, ordinary, conventional worldly consciousnesses, as that's what sort of sets the base standard for what we talk about in the world. And then it can be, as I said, further analysis, because it's like we don't want to just go by everything that people think to be true at a certain time. Then you don't have any path, and you don't have any social progress in the world, right? But you do have social progress in the world insofar as people are paying attention to what it feels like and means to be a human, and analyzes and thinks about what it would be like to be an animal, and then does analysis. And on the basis of that kind of thing, you can reform what seemed to be, what was generally known in the world can be established as, well, that's actually discredited or refuted by further conventional knowledge. Okay, and the same thing, of course, is that's the way we get free from cyclic existence, is to say, well, yeah, what is the ultimate character of those things finally? Okay, so that's one little bit. And then, let's see. So, things are established through mutual, this is me in clear words, things are established through mutual dependence. If a sensory consciousness is unimpaired, that is, there isn't any eye disease or any other, problem making some kind of error that affects it, then we can say that it's accurate in conventional terms. Of course, it's always going to be mistaken in terms of it's a false appearance, because under the influence of ignorance, things appear to it as though they were intrinsically existent, which of course they're not. But even though it has this false appearance of intrinsic existence, we can still say that if it's unimpaired, that it's accurate in conventional terms. It's giving us useful, practical, accurate information about peacocks and tables and chairs and horses and cows, and without there having to be any essential nature on its own side. And then this is the actual passage. I hope you guys aren't getting tired yet. This is the actual passage where I say this, and it seems like maybe an obscure thing and like maybe a minor thing, but this is where I tell you as much as you need to know, even though it doesn't seem like much, but this is as much as you need to know about how we know. I'm having a cramp in my leg. I have to stand up for a second. As much as you need to know about this question of how do you know what is what. Perceivers of falsities, minds that see conventional things, are of two types. Those with clear sensory faculties and those with impaired sensory faculties. Consciousness that has an impaired sensory faculty is going to be wrong in relationship to one that has a good sensory faculty. And it's the same thing with the objects of those sensory faculties. The ones that are known by the world and apprehended by the unimpaired sensory faculties, that's what we take as true in the world, and the rest we constitute as untrue, unreal, even in the world, like that face in the mirror really being a person, and so forth. So then, I go on and give some examples. So what do you mean by impaired? You know, and I say, well, eye disease, jaundice, eating Jimson weed so that you hallucinate, echo, like a sound within a cave creating an echo, a mirror's reflection, magician causing a mirage, the shimmering, when the heat goes on the desert and then it makes something appear from the way the sunlight is, and all these kinds of things, and so then there's all kinds of things that affect our both inside and outside, which sort of disqualify. Everybody understands as like disqualify our senses as being accurate information, even to start with. But when you have the accurate, these are like accurate information to start with, then you say, well, this is what we take as being the legitimate kinds of objects in the world, and people can just like say, if it seems like that, to healthy, unimpaired consciousnesses, then we'll start by taking that as the way we look at things, unless further analysis shows that either at the conventional level or ultimate level, something that's appearing to that kind of mind is actually wrong. So that's the way I explained it. I mean, it's different from how other people explained it. Why? Because I focused on the role of the consciousness, not on some character in the object itself, as the basis for saying when we know something and when we don't. All right? And that's one way it's different. And let me see, just read... me or the book?
What you just said, who has been saying
my whole Chandrakirti is Chandrakirti as interpreted by Tsongkhapa, and that's like all the voice that I'm using today. If I'm saying what was wrong with Bhava Viveka, I'll say Bhava Viveka was wrong in this sentence, but otherwise we're like laying out, that was Bhava Viveka had his turn yesterday, so I'm trying to like say what was wrong about his thing. So, this is the idea. It's like, just to repeat what I just said, is the idea that my way of saying how you know what's what is not because they're on the side of the basis of imputation and within it there's some like special thing in there, that we can identify that say, oh, that's what we mean by cat, is the catness that's there lurking underneath its sternum, right? No, it's just like, well, we're people in the world, and we know how to use words, and we're not on drugs, and we know a cat when we see it, right? Okay, so and it's like that's what it is. Now, we could be wrong if somebody could come along later and say that was a dog in a cat suit, which would be very surprising, But you know what I'm saying? This is not likely to happen, right? It could be mistaken. Right? A person could be mistaken, and some dogs are very small and so forth. So, there's a possibility that what you think is the case can be shown to be wrong because of various angles of perception and circumstantial things inside and outside. But generally speaking, right, we know what we're talking about, right, in the world at the conventional level. So, Tsongkhapa in the future, right, he read all this stuff he read that stuff that I explained. And he then laid out these criteria for what it means for something to conventionally exist, which I did go through before, but I basically went through again. But here's what he says about it. We hold, this is on page 178 in the Great Treatise, Volume 3. We hold that something exists conventionally if it is known to a conventional consciousness. 1. If no other conventional valid cognition contradicts its being as it is thus known. 2. And if the reason that accurately analyzes reality, that analyzes whether something intrinsically exists, does not contradict it. Okay, so those are the three. So I've basically been talking about the first one mainly, and this is what Tsongkhapa says about this. He says conventional consciousness really don't just operate in the context of the question, is this what's appearing to my mind or not? It doesn't necessarily analyze too deeply, but it can be somewhat analytical. As long as you're not inquiring the question, how does this object really exist, you can ask questions and make determinations, and that's how we, do ethics and so forth in the past. So, but that operates within the context of how things are usually appearing or how they're known to a worldly consciousness. This is Tsongkhapa. So he says, therefore we call this mundane knowledge, worldly knowledge. Worldly knowledge is like this sense of what things are for these unimpaired consciousnesses. And he said, this kind of consciousness occurs in all persons whether or not they're studying philosophy. That is, even Bhava Viveka has world... But no, but that's my point. It's not like, it's just like cowherds and, do you know what I'm saying? It's not just the farmers who have worldly knowledge. By worldly knowledge, we're talking about something that everybody has. When Bhava Viveka and his friends get together for an argument, they have to give reasons and examples. And all of that comes from the same repertoire of worldly knowledge experience that everybody else shares about the difference between cats and hats. None of them are, in my view, actually getting at any intrinsic character in those things. They've just lived in the world and they see what's what, right? So no matter whose mind stream it occurs in, we call this mundane knowledge, whether it's a mundane person or not, and we call it non-analytical knowledge. So when you think about a debate or an argument or a philosopher trying to prove to yourself that things are empty, all of the repertoire of information that we get from these ordinary conventional consciousnesses provides the data for doing analysis. It's not like we just, we'll do reason. We'll do a reason on basis of what? We do it on the basis of this kind of experience that we have in the world. It's like you have to use the experience you have in the world to try to analyze whether some other experiences you're having about how the world exists are right or wrong. I'm just like, what else can we do? You can look to the scriptures, but then, of course, you have the problem of the scriptures contradicting each other and which ones to rely on, so then you have to use reason too. So this is what Tsongkhapa says, is all the arguments that we use in reasoning go back to this common repertoire of experience that everybody has. And none of it involves, like, detecting catosity in cats, which is just a confabulation of philosophers who are pandering to people's preference for some objective reality on the side of things themselves. It doesn't have to be that way, right? So then, having sort of laid that basis, then obviously you go on to say, he gives the example as like, well, a rope looks like a snake, then you can use conventional experience to show that it isn't. A mirage looks like water. You can go closer and look and find out, oh, it just looked like water, but it's really not water. And so that's what we mean by, I was making that carving out a piece of the pie, and so that you get, refine the sense of what part of what people believe about the world is right and what part is wrong. And then you carve out the different piece, which is really, important on the other side of the path, because that piece is important, especially for the method side of the path. But on the wisdom side of the path, you have to carve out the other side, which is that everybody's going around everything appearing to them is intrinsically existent. And there's this false appearance that's going all the time, and some people sometimes are actively, all of us are sometimes actively assenting to it, and it's tangled up with our afflictions, and it's just rampant through all, then manifesting, like weeds out through all the philosophy, because the philosophy is done by people who have these afflictions. And so then, that can only be refuted by ultimate analysis that analyzes, well, it's true that everything appears this way, but when we look at it, is there any way that holds up under analysis? And that would be like the person. It's like the trial thing that I was doing yesterday, and saying, there's this false appearance of, the person's colorblind, they can't tell red from green. We can't tell existent. Our ordinary mundane knowledge is giving us this evidence that's tainted. It's only data we have. That's the whole point about prasangika. All of our conventional valid knowledge is tainted by a false appearance. And Bhava Viveka can't deal with that. He's like, no, I've got to have a witness that sees things right, and that's why he thinks that he can set up these logical syllogisms and argue with the Buddhist realists, because he thinks that there is a way that our senses kind of get at things the way they actually are. And we're saying, no, you have this false appearance of intrinsic nature. It's true. You believe that things have this extra elaborated character on their own side, and we can see why you do, because it's always appearing to you that things have that. But in fact, they don't need it. They don't have it. Things work perfectly fine without it. And in fact, that's the only way anything's going to work at all. Okay. So that's what Tsongkhapa had to say, where he was explaining the answer to the question about that. So let me just, in order to try to make this just a little bit clearer, this helped to make it a little bit clearer to me. I don't know, I haven't written any, I've just started thinking about this, is that like, you can compare this a little bit to philosophy of science. And there's just like a realism in the philosophy of science, the thinking, well, science is this conventional analysis of trying to find out, how things are working in the world. And scientists, being people, are realists, right, by by tendency. And so initially, of course, the idea was, well, we'll find out what's really going on out there. Right? And because we've gotten better at knowing what's really going on from the side of the object out there, then that's why we have so much power, It's because we have this like deeper understanding of what's really there intrinsically on the object side. That's the Bhava-Viveka model that's a Bhava-Viveka philosophy of science. And Mark Sideritz, who holds this philosophy, that's his philosophy. So if you see in Mark Sideritz's books, he's like very good Buddhist philosopher. He teaches in Seoul now. And that is exactly his view, okay? Right. But I would say, well, of course, there's a better philosophy of science, and there's which is modern philosophy of science to be, and that would correspond more to Chandrakirti's view, right? And that is, we really can't, we can do science which is similar, I would say, to Lojong in a sense, is we can do a process of looking at what's in our mind and making discriminations and figuring out how to change it, and engaging in certain, processes for refinement. We can do investigations of what's going on without having to have some idea of getting at something on the objective side that we've gotten outside our skins and gotten hold of it as having a character from its own side. In fact, it turns out that, the more you think about it, the clearer it becomes that you can't really get out there and check to see if the cat has the catosity or not. And scientists, it was like started to realize that. Kant, first had laid it out already, and initially it didn't affect science very much. It still had this kind of strong realism. But then, of course, when you had quantum physics start, and then you had Heisenberg, and people started going, whoa, we hadn't really thought very much about it, but it seems like there's kind of a problem here, because it's like how we're looking at things and how we're setting up the experiment seems to be entangled. We call quantum entanglement, is entangled with, what kinds of results we get. And it's like, that doesn't make any sense to us. As, we're here to do real science, and it just boggles our... So what we will do is we'll say, we don't know what this means, but the formulas work. And so, philosophy of science is now, right, is that we make models, mostly mathematical, but also, based on that, other kinds of pictures to help people. We make models which are of how the world works. And what are those like? Those are like the mundane knowledge that Chandrakirti was talking about. It's a process of taking the mundane knowledge, creating a model of the world, right, of how the world works based on our empirical experience. You have the senses, they have this certain data, right, and maybe some of it's contaminated, but it's what you have to work with, right, and then you think about and analyze what it means, and you create a sort of a picture of a model of the world, and then you test it and see, well, does this predict what, so for example, you analyze your mind, you observe what's going on in your mind, that's like empirical observation. And then you think about what you've observed, right? And then you formulate some sort of picture of like a lack of self. And then you think about what the implications of that would be. And you try to act in a way that would correspond to that. And then you see whether that's helpful or not. And if it's not, then you have to refine it in some way. And that's not to do with ever getting outside and saying, oh, I know what the world really is from that side. And it's like, it's very hard. I mean, because my friend, the physicist, is just like all the rest of us, fundamentally, has a realist view in some level. And he really, at one level of his self, feels that there's an objective world out there, and it's his job as a scientist to try to get at it. But then he knows that that's not how science even can begin to conceive of itself as working anymore, that it's come to a philosophical understanding that it can't, that there aren't like natures that it can get to outside of its own means of measurement and observation on the side of the object. But that doesn't mean that it can't work. It can work anyway, just like the path, without the ability to get to anything intrinsically real out there on the side of the object. And how is that? By making taking the best knowledge that we have, analyzing it as carefully as we can, creating a model, and trying to see, well, how well does this work? And then chopping off the parts that are discredited by further analysis, which is exactly what I said in the 7th century. Don't know why it took them so long. So, I think that's like a little bit from. I think I read a little bit of this. Tsongkhapa's notion that valid conventional existence is not there. Tsongkhapa's image of conventional existence is not that there's some means of cognition that reliably gets at the essential nature of objects, even at the conventional level. We've talked about it. Instead, nor do we have to just go along with whatever common sense or conventional wisdom dictates in a certain social situation. Rather, careful observation and then analysis at either the conventional or the ultimate level will discredit or falsify those mental imputations that are unsustainable. The data of sense experience and our ability to, including our, observation of our own minds, and our ability to analyze allows us to challenge, discredit, and falsify a great many conventional imputations. And those conventional imputations that cannot be thus falsified constitute what exists. That's what it means for something to exist conventionally. Right? So we falsify things. Falsification, right? I'm using this language of like discrediting or like ruling out. There are things that are imputed by ordinary conventional minds, but we can use further analysis to falsify many of these. Even things that are very widely believed to be real become, refined through further conventional analysis out of existence almost, like phlogiston, right, which nobody remembers what it was, but then before everybody thought that was the substance of fire. Right? So through the use of conventional knowledge, and I already said, empirical evidence and analysis of that. So there's a process of elimination, process of falsification. And I started to think of it as almost like an epistemological survival of the fittest, like whatever actually works over time, it's like, well, then this implies a kind of progressive, hopeful model. I'm not sure it always is like that because the afflictions are pushing back, right? But anyway, if we're working on the right side, then you can have this kind of like evolution where you have a certain model of say what would work at the Abbey, and it's like not that, and then you set things up that way, and then you see, oh, well, we should change this word in this prayer like this, and we should like change this rule like that, and then you have some refinement over time in how things are set up. That's what it means to know things and to progress either in science or in the path and understanding conventionally. That's what I think. And so let's see. I'm getting toward being done. Okay, so I have just like a last part. That's my main explanation of that. So I was thinking back on that, Kensei Norbu book, What Makes You Not a Buddhist, and so I have this resistance to the idea that you have to subscribe to a tenet system in order to be a Buddhist, and it's like I think that like abandoning refuge is what makes you not a Buddhist, and that would be like enough to say, But then, for those of us who are fortunate enough, where I was like trying to remember what the words are, have the liberty and the endowment, to study and practice the Dharma, then taking refuge in the Dharma, quote unquote, can't be just like a word. It has to be, and it can't just be a picture of some book or something like that. It's like a vague image of emptiness, something like that. It has to be, it has to involve, and this is from what His Holiness taught, it has to involve the process of finding the view, the understanding actually from our own side what emptiness is. And, you know, the way His Holiness taught it, it was almost like sort of saying, it sort of sounds like, well, you don't really have refuge unless you understand the objects of refuge, and you don't really understand the objects of refuge until you don't unless you understand emptiness. And it's like, well, there goes almost all the Buddhists. I was watching them evaporate as he was talking. Yeah. So, I don't know, I would want to say something like, you know, you have more authenticity or you have more depth and, you know, in your refuge rather than it's just like draw a line like that. But now I was like, I have a couple of, you know, ending quotes from from the great treatise, which has ended up being my sort of reference point for a lot of this talks here. And I told you this before, you know, it's like because of this, you know, finding the view is so difficult, you know, Tsongkhapa said, and to really think about what it means for something to not exist at all on the object side, but still then function conventionally, right, as mere imputation. Then it says, since certainty about appearances and certainty about emptiness almost never develop together. So I think, you know, we shouldn't just go around and think that this is something that's like self-evident. It's like Jerome Rinpoche said, it's extremely difficult to find the view, and that really understanding these two things at the same time almost never develop together. And then, but on the other hand, that's the kind of discouraging part, I would say. But then, on the other hand, he says, that was on page 138. Later in the book on page 259, he says, you know, even though we're all going around, everything's appearing as intrinsically existent, it doesn't mean that all the time we're always thinking that these things are intrinsically existent. Sometimes we're more in an active or manifest way assenting to this false appearance, and sometimes maybe things just appear to us and it doesn't engage or sort of activate a kind of active misconception at that time, right? If there's no other afflictions coming up or we have some virtuous mind, right? We have, you know, an appearance of inherently existent guru or something like that, and but it doesn't mean that we're thinking, oh yeah, that guru is inherently existent necessarily. So, and then it's also possible, even within an appearance of things as inherently existent, to have an unenlightened being who still has a doubt, you know, or a qualm, or is thinking, oh, these things are appearing to me in this way, but I doubt or I wonder if they really exist that way. And, you know, this leads into the idea of the three compassions that Chandrakirti talked about, that there's just, you know, ordinary compassion that looks at sentient beings, and then as we understand more and more about how we and they exist, we start to see these we still meditate in compassion of the sentient beings, but we see them qualified with their momentary disintegration. And then as we understand more about emptiness, the beings that we're saving don't appear to us as being naturally existent from their own side. And it's like, well, it's like, oh, why save them? That's not how we're, you know, if we've really cultivated compassion and understanding of how things exist, even though they're empty, then those two attitudes won't contradict each other. But just in the way that Venerable Jerome was explaining, and also I think in some other ways, but this is a very important way, is that, you know, you don't become exhausted with the idea of saving all beings, right? When you understand that their suffering will change, their minds will change. You know, they have no fixed nature, right? And therefore they're not intractably, it's not a hopeless case. That's what I was trying to say with that quote. And so anyway, as I said in my commentary on Arya Davis 400, pots and such don't exist at all under the fivefold analysis as to whether they're the same as their causes or other than the causes. Nevertheless, just through dependent imputation, they do things like hold or scoop honey or water or milk. Isn't that wonderful? It's like, so I was reading that and I was like, it's like, you don't understand why he's saying that unless you've gone through and thought about the full implications of what it means to really say that things are empty. Otherwise, you're like, yeah, well, dependent horizon is emptiness, of course. Why was like, what's the wonder about? The wonder has to come from really engaging with the sense of, things are strongly, forcefully appearing as though they can only function because they have this nature from their own side, right? And yet, utterly without anything like that, they work just fine. And then you go, oh my God, this is like a magic, or like there's a sense that there's like a miracle has taken place, right? And of course, it's not. Then you realize, it's not a miracle at all. This is the way everything works. This is actually the natural world as we've been refusing to see it because we're so afraid, of facing up to this. And it's a this is very dangerous to get this idea that there's nothing there on the object side. But it also, when you understand it correctly, then it has this quality of liberating you and having a sense of freedom. And it's like, now there's a big joke on delusion, that's like all that. It's like he's having delight, but it could be like a sense of you've seen through the trick that's been played on you. And so we're released into a sense that even without something there intrinsically on the object side, and in fact, only because there isn't there something on the object side in itself, everything works and can be made to work beautifully for the benefit of all. That's one. Yes. All right. Took a long time to go through all that. Right.
I think you represented my friend.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Right.
It's obvious that the cup doesn't exist as a cup from its own side, conventionally, or that's a very gross thing. And it's proven by the fact that you compare Bob to a
Uh-huh.
That's just obvious. It shows that you don't understand.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. The subtlety of his Madhyamaka view.
So obviously the cup itself is imputed upon a basis that you both agree upon.
Yeah.
But you're saying that the validity of that basis comes merely from a conventional agreement, essentially, that we can take that basis and use it for this.
Yeah. As a starting point, right? Unless there's some other further experience that there's no impairment in the way in the way of conventional mind. We just go along with that, like the example of knowing when it's time to pick apples, or asking a farmer, which is like, if this would be a good potato to plant or a good one to eat. There's like, well, there's not some like there's conventional knowledge in the world about everything, like what's a cat.
So how do you account for the qualities that object has? Like the height of the cup.
Mm-hmm.
We all agree on the height of the cup, whether we agree whether it's a cup or not.
It has qualities.
When
Oh,
we
absolutely.
see those qualities are coming from the side. It's not necessarily that there is something findable, but those qualities are emanating from that side, and that's proven by even the fact that someone who's eaten into you can still reach for the cup and pick it up, even if they think it's an
Mm-hmm.
monster.
Mm-hmm. So you're going to say that I'm not saying it doesn't have quality. It has quality, and we have conventional knowledge as long as we're unimpaired about the qualities and attributes of the different phenomena that exist in our world, and that conventional knowledge is subject to falsification by further experience of the senses and analysis of what the implication of those attributions of qualities are. Like people could take it as self-evident that what? I don't know. I'm having a hard example thinking of an example relating to the cup. But people could just take it in a certain society as like self-evident that left-handed people are problematic, and then upon further analysis find that there's like actually no basis for that. So there's an attribution of equality, you know, that goes on, and just because that quality is being attributed by a conventional mind doesn't mean that it's real even conventionally. That's the starting point. But then there has to be, what do you say? I'm saying an analysis both at the conventional and ultimate level, or inspection, a process of falsification that goes on so that you draw down the broad picture of what people subscribe to in the world, to circumscribe it to those subset of things. So one of the things that you don't eliminate is things like cups being cups and cats being cats and tables being tables, but things about like left-handed people being bad and things having intrinsic existence in accordance with how they appear, those things turn out to be like ruled out when you further analyze. That's all. It's not that things don't have features and qualities. It's just that they're all conventionally accessible.
And that those qualities are merely imputed by the mind.
Well, by merely imputed by the mind, if you recall, means that they're imputed on the basis of a basis of designation. They're not merely imputed by mind does not rule out there being a basis of designation. They're imputed by the mind on the basis of a designation. And he's like, well, which basis of designation? Well, if you're a worldly person and you're not messed up, then you usually know. And sometimes you might be wrong, and then we'll, you know, help you think about it and get that fixed. That's the way things are. That's the way things are. It's like, I was like, this is what I was feeling when I was saying, you know, I mean, it's like, we know. We know how it is. You're living and you walk and you take a step, and you know, so usually people are just like, okay, I'm going somewhere, and they don't notice. But there's another way to take a step where you see, well, what does it feel like to take a step? What's really happening here? That's what Buddhists have been doing, right, since the beginning. And say, okay, well, that isn't really what I thought a step was. Right? It's like, there wasn't any stepness or wholeness. It was like just all these different, and so then you start to think about like, well, we can just notice stuff that people aren't normally paying attention to. We think about what it means, think about what that implies about how things really are, think about what it implies about how we act, and it doesn't, you know, require magic. It's the magic. It just means paying attention and thinking about what we're noticing as we're paying attention. And it doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't mean that there has to be anything other than a basis of imputation. There's a basis of imputation that we understand as appropriate, and if it turns out to be inappropriate, then that's determined by further empirical experience and analysis at the conventional ultimate level. That's all there is to it. So people are unsatisfied by that, and they want to like then have some character on the side of the object. But I really don't think that is going to lead them anywhere. As they really can't ever like get outside themselves to check on this character. We're just sort of stuck here, knowing what we know, right, and then trying to improve it from the inside. Isn't that right? Yeah. Oh no. Well, as Chandrakirti, I completely agree with your being confounded by that. But Bhava Viveka over here on my right, he may be able to tell you. I mean, I thought I talked about this yesterday, but it's like really, I don't know if I want to switch over to being Bhava Viveka. It muddies the whole thing.
But that's what I was criticizing you with Bhava Viveka for yesterday.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's what as Chandrakirti, that's definitely what I mean, Prasangika, that's what it means to really, and this is a core piece of being Prasangika, is thinking that ultimate existence, it's not like the lack of inherent existence is something subtler than the lack of ultimate existence. For Prasangika, that's the same thing. And from my point of view, I'm like, well, Bhava Viveka is making a mistake in trying to split these apart. But I guess what I was trying to say, try to get you to see, and I had some success apparently, is that that's not like a self-evident thing. It's like actually a really weird thing in a way in the history, by which I mean it's a really unique and amazing thing in the history of Buddhism. It's not like everybody thought this, and it's like some people think that the reason Chandrakirti's system was less successful than Svatantrika and Chittamatra in India was because many Buddhists didn't feel that it provided a substantial enough basis on ontology that could be, a basis for their faith and confidence and karma and their effects and the practice of the path. It just didn't seem like, a good thing. Whether it was like, well, it's not a good thing for me personally, or it's not a good thing to teach the kids. I'm not sure. It always occurred to me, is that the way? And I noticed that the Gelugpas, they don't start out like with that with the kids, right? Yeah. It's true. No. Well, that's you're making me go over to be Bhava Viveka again. But, it's like what I try to say is sort of like from Bhava Viveka's point of view, this idea of a suitable basis of imitation means that there has to be, like all the other Buddhists except the Prasangikas in some way are saying, we're imputing this as a self, but it can't be just in relationship to any random thing. So there has to be some character or nature on the side of the object where you can say that's what it really is, and that's why it's appropriate to call it that. Right. Right. Exactly. So there's like, do you see what I'm saying? There's convention, there's imputation, but it has to be in relation. So, what Chandrakirti didn't actually use this word suitable, but I did talk about the interdependence between the object of imputation and that there's an interdependence between the mind doing the imputing and the basis of imputation, right? But this idea of suitability or concordance between the two, then people talked about in Tibet. But what that I would say is that they're saying it's suitable in terms of what the world understands. The mundane knowledge, knows the difference between cats and dogs, and then if there's some problem with that, then there's a way that further conventional experience of the senses and analysis is able to fix up. I think it's very naturalistic system. It fits with the way the world really is, without adding any kind of extra philosophical construct called intrinsic nature. And it's saying, well, let's say that has to be real in accordance with how things appear. They just say, well, we don't really need that. Yes. Mm. Well, if you're going by the way that I explained today, then they're permanent. It's like a true cessation is an emptiness. It's an ultimate phenomenon. It can't be the effect of something. So it's a fundamental quality of the mind. It's the mind's lack of any inherently existent afflictions, and the mind has, in some sense, you could say, always been. We've always been lacking in inherently existent afflictions, but this, when we, root them out as existing conventionally once and for all, then it's like letting that light shine, You know, that's the idea. But it's not like you've made that light. You haven't produced the lack of inherent existence of the afflictions. They never had any inherent existence. So if that's what you think that you mean by a true cessation, you can't actually produce that. What you can do is, you know, produce a mind that is utterly clear of an affliction or a certain aspect of an affliction, right? By eliminating it at the conventional level, as in forever, right? And then once you do that, then it's like the banana situation. It's like, well, how do you tell the difference between the bananas not existing and the bananas not inherently existing? There is a difference as long as the banana is there, and it's pretty important. But when the banana is not there, and it's never going to be there again, it's like, why? It's like, that's what I think this means. Chariot to say it's exhausted or extinguished or dissolved into reality. It's like, you know, it's not. I don't think it's supposed to be something very mystical, really. It just means like that example is a banana. You can take the banana and say, well, that's not a mystical fact. This is just like something that's clear. Yeah. Yeah.
Going back to the fact that some problems addressing Newland, would you worry about the pronouns being realistic in terms of conventional reality or the ones in the
Well, what I tried to say today, starting with that, is that from Tsongkhapa's point of view, there was nihilism about conventional phenomena, and this was both on behalf of Jonangpa's and on behalf of many people interpreting Chandrakirti who were prior to that. And he was saying, you know, like, I'm in the lineage of following Chandrakirti. Pretty much everybody else so far in Tibet has messed that up. Well, I think everybody, basically. Everybody before me has not understood what Chandrakirti meant. Okay? He doesn't really say, there's the person who got it right. Here's all the people who got it wrong. So he's concerned predominantly about, if you look at the whole, there's a huge section on, you know, clarifying the object of negation in Great Treatise. It's mostly about eliminating a kind of making the object of negation include things that shouldn't be negated. People negating too much on the conventional side, and that and what he seems to be, when he goes the other way and he talks about, like, you know, reification, he does seem to be at that point talking about a Jonangpa reification of the ultimate. However, I think that that's just from reading the Great Treatise, and it doesn't, like, explicitly attack Jonangpa because very much, except for a little short passage, because it's trying to say this is the system of Chandrakirti, and now I'm going to refute all the other people who misinterpreted in order to clarify the object of negation. And that's just one part of the whole description of the whole path. But if you look at the corpus of Tsongkhapa's mature work, as Jeffrey has and compared it to Dolpapa, he's pretty much come to the conclusion that Dolpapa was not just like a minor Purvapaksha, you know, not like somebody that it was just to the side, a minor person, but it was like one of the main prior people in reaction to whom Tsongkhapa was formulating his ideas, and not just a minor one. So that can be seen in a lot of ways. For example, the fact that, you know, he well, if you read the Essence of Eloquence book, then you can see everything about how he decides, this is how we're going to decide what's interpretable and what's definitive, is like just basically a refutation of everything that Dolpapa had said about how we should set up what the systems mean and what sutras they're based on and how to read which sutras. It's kind of like the opposite of Dolpapa, like from through. I mean, I've already talked about this a few times, but I mean, the idea is that Dolpova Sherpa Gyaltsen system was like extremely popular in Tibet, you know, in Tsongkhapa's lifetime and right before that, and Rendawa, Tsongkhapa's Sakya teacher, you know, read the book 3 times and first thought it was good, and the first thought it was bad, and then thought it was good, and then concluded that it was quite bad on the 3rd reading. So, you know, it's like something that was the context. That was the immediate context. So Tsongkhapa had these 2 contexts. One is like, I'm going to say that Chandrakirti is the right one, so I have to look at all the people who've taken Chandrakirti as their main guide before and explain what I'm going to say that Chandrakirti said. It's a big focus in the great treatise. But then as he goes along, he's trying to, you know, say, the reason I have a great exposition of a mantra, and it's not the same as my, you know, other texts on clarifying interpretations of sutra or my texts on the stages of the path, is that these are distinctive systems which you don't just like smoosh together and like read all the different sutras from the different and all the different tantras as like commentaries on each other, but you try to understand, you know, what the teaching of Buddha is in each of these. Okay, and that was exactly the opposite of what Dolpova was doing. Dolpova from Tsongkhapa's point of view, Dolpova created a new system, whereas Dolpova felt he discovered the real system. Tsongkhapa, he created a new system by melding together inappropriately Yogacara ideas, Kalachakra ideas, and Madhyamaka ideas. Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, this is a great question. This question is in the book. You have somebody Tsongkhapa makes up somebody to ask exactly that question. They are impaired, actually. So when I say unimpaired, I'm using shorthand. You know, you have to like it's like they're all, our senses are pervasively impaired by, you know, this false appearance of things, this is why I was using to try to clarify, you know, my Chandrakirti view on this is that use the example of the colorblind witness to the traffic accident. It's like we're colorblind witnesses to our own traffic accident. Is the fact that we're colorblind doesn't disable, so we're impaired. We're always impaired. We're always impaired. It's like we have impaired practice of compassion. You know, it's like everything's impaired because it, or you know, it has this level of distortion in the way things are appearing, right? It doesn't mean that there isn't any value in it or any accurate information that's conveyed. That's why when I was doing this comparing to science, is that, well, all the data has potentially some problems, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't have other useful information that's with it too, right? I mean, you don't ever have a perfect experiment, but you still have some useful data, especially if you align it with other experiments where the kinds of data, kinds of errors might have been a little different, right? Like, so we don't all have perfect eyesight, but, you know, we have some agreement about, like, what exists around here. And to the degree that one of us is, like, a little bit messed up, then we have some sort of consensus that emerges in terms of, and so in that way, when I say unimpaired, I mean like lacking any superficial cause of impairment. And that's why I went through that list of, like, you know, kinds of examples of superficial cause of impairment. There's always pulgi-trulgi, that's like deeper or more profound cause of impairment, which is because you have a fundamental misconception of things existing inherently, and this is reinforcing and then reinforced by the false appearance of things as inherently existing. That's like the color blindness. You know, you can't tell intrinsic existence from existence, you know, in the way things appear. But that doesn't mean we can't analyze and figure out whether, even when we have red-green color blindness, maybe we could still figure out whether the light was red or green. It's not going to be that easy. That's my idea. Mm. I'm not gonna. I think you're happy. I don't want to disturb you. Okay. Well, I finished what I had to say.